Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where even the air you breathe feels like it might come with the surcharge. Imagine standing in a muddy village square, clutching a lump of dough like it's a contraband substance. Because in this era, your own kitchen is a crime scene. You're about to find out that freedom in the Middle Ages was basically a premium DLC that nobody could afford. You probably won't survive this journey without losing at least half your grain to a man in a velvet hat who calls himself your protector. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the thick, gray slush of a Tuesday morning in the year 1250. Your boots, if you can, even call these reinforced leather sacks boots, are soaked through and your toes have long since gone numb, which is probably a mercy. You are a peasant, a cog in the vast creaking machinery of the feudal system. In your arms, you cradle a heavy wooden bowl filled with dough. It's a simple mixture of rye, some barley, and a prayer that it actually rises this time. You're heading toward the center of the village, not because you want a social outing, but because baking bread in your own fireplace is now a one-way ticket to a very expensive conversation with the local magistrate. Once upon a time, your grandfather used to bake his loaves right at home, the smell of toasted crust filling the small, smoky cottage. But those days of free heat are gone. The lord of the manor has realized that hunger is the ultimate subscription model. He has invoked what the legal scholars call banalities. It sounds like a word for something boring, but in the 13th century, it's the medieval equivalent of a corporate monopoly that would make a modern tech giant blush. The Lord has built a massive stone oven, the four banal, and he has issued a decree. No one bakes anywhere else. To ensure compliance, his goons have already made a sweep through the village, smashing any private ovens they found. It's less like a neighborhood bakery and more like a mandatory government facility where you pay for the privilege of not starving. As you reach the stone structure, the heat hits you first. It's a wall of warmth that smells of burning oak and the sour tang of fermented yeast. It should be inviting, but you know the cost. Standing there is the fournier, the oven keeper. He's a man who looks like he's been cured in wood smoke, with skin the color of an old leather belt and eyes that count every ounce of dough you bring. He doesn't take cash. Nobody really has cash. He takes a mulcher. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Lord's monopoly on the big three, the mill, the oven, and the wine press allowed them to legally seize a portion of every peasant output. Usually, it's about 1/16 of your bread. You hand over a chunk of your hard-earned dough, watching him toss it into a separate pile. It's the processing fee for your own survival. You wait your turn in the dim light, the itchy wool of your tunic rubbing against your neck. The air is thick with the chatter of other villagers, all complaining in low whispers. You're all trapped in the same loop. If you tried to use a small hand mill at home to grind your grain in secret, you'd be risking a massive fine. In a particularly quirky and fringe bit of historical pettiness, some lords actually sent mill wardens into houses to listen for the telltale clack-clack of illegal stone querns. If they caught you grinding your own flour, they wouldn't just fine you, they'd take your grinding stones and use them to pave the Lord's parlor. It's the medieval version of a copyright strike, but instead of taking down your video, they take down your ability to eat breakfast. Managing your expectations is key here. The Lord's oven isn't exactly a Michelin star establishment. Because the fournier is a busy man with a monopoly, he doesn't really care if your bread is perfectly golden brown. He's going to shove your loaf into the back of the oven with a long wooden peel, right next to 20 other loaves. If yours comes out looking like a charcoal brick or smelling like the neighbor's burnt onions, that's just character. You're paying for the heat, not the quality. Historians still argue whether these communal ovens were actually a benefit to the village, providing a more efficient, high heat bake than a small home fire could, or if they were purely a parasitic extraction of wealth designed to keep the peasantry in a state of perpetual just enough. Think about it. The Lord owns the woods, so he owns the fuel. He owns the land, so he owns the grain. He owns the oven, so he owns the fire. It's a closed loop economy where the only thing you own is the sweat on your brow. And even that is probably taxable if the Lord can find a way to bottle it. It's a lot like modern life, really. You don't own your software, you license it. You don't own your movies, you stream them. You didn't own your bread in 1250, you just rented the right to turn flour into something edible. As you wait for your rye loaf to bake, you notice a woman marking her dough with a specific wooden stamp. This was common practice to prevent the oven keeper from accidentally swapping your decent wheat loaf for someone else's sawdust-heavy disaster. It's the medieval version of writing your name on your lunch bag in the office fridge, except the stakes are a week of malnutrition. You watch the flickering orange light of the fire dance off the soot-stained walls. There's a certain irony in the fact that the Lord provides the service of the oven, yet the villagers have to provide the labor of carrying the heavy dough back and forth through the mud. It's like a delivery app where you are the driver, the customer, and the person paying the 30% service fee. The fournier finally pulls your loaf out. It's hot, heavy, and slightly lopsided. You wrap it in a coarse linen cloth, the heat seeping through to warm your frozen fingers. It's a small victory, but a bitter one. As you walk back toward your hut, you pass the village well. You realize that even the water you'd use to wash down this dry bread isn't exactly free either. If you want to use the bridge to cross the stream to get to the better well, there's a toll for that too. Living in the Middle Ages was essentially a long series of microtransactions, and your account balance was always dangerously close to zero. You take a bite of the crust, it's gritty. The Lord's millstones are old and poorly maintained, shedding bits of sand into the flour. But hey, at least the sand is free, right? You walk past the Lord's manor, a hulking shadow on the hill, and you can almost hear the invisible coins clinking every time you take a breath. It's a long road ahead, and bread is just the beginning. Tomorrow, you have to figure out how to pay for the privilege of crossing a river that's been there since the dawn of time, but somehow now belongs to a guy who inherited a piece of parchment. You tuck your warm, charcoal-kissed loaf of rye under your arm, the heat from the bread seeping through your thin tunic and offering a fleeting sense of comfort against the damp morning air. But the road home isn't just a straight line, it's a series of invisible barriers. About a mile from the communal oven, the path is bisected by the River Wey. It's not a grand, sweeping body of water, more like a moody, over-ambitious stream, but it represents the next hurdle in your daily quest for survival. In your grandfather's time, this river was just part of the landscape, as free as the air or the mud currently caking your shins. You'd hike up your skirts or breeches, wade through the cool current, and be on your way. Today, however, the river has a landlord. As you approach the wooden bridge, you see him, standing in a small, weathered shack that smells of wet dog and cheap ale is the Lord's toll collector. He's a medieval version of a pop-up ad that you just can't close. He doesn't move fast. Nothing in the 13th century moves fast except the plague, but he has a very firm grip on a heavy iron box. This is where you encounter pontage. It's a mainstream historical fact that lords were granted the right by the crown to collect tolls for the maintenance of bridges. It sounds reasonable, right? A public service tax for infrastructure. But looking at the bridge, which is currently missing 3 planks and swaying in a light breeze like a drunk sailor, you start to suspect the maintenance fund is mostly being spent on the Lord's new tapestry collection. You consider your options. You could pay the pontage coin, or you could try to be clever. You look at the riverbank, 50 yards downstream. The water there is shallow, barely reaching a man's knees. You figure you'll just wade across, keep your coin, and accept a little bit of trench foot as a fair trade. But as you step toward the bank, the collector clears his throat with a sound like gravel in a blender. He points to a wooden sign. Not that you can read it, but the drawing of a man drowning in a bag of coins is pretty universal. He informs you that there is a waiting fee. Yes, in a quirky and fringe bit of legal audacity, some lords didn't just tax the bridge, they taxed the water itself. If you want to use the riverbed, which technically belongs to the lord's estate, you are trespassing on his silt. It's a medieval equivalent of a convenience fee for a service you didn't even use. Historians still argue whether these tolls were legitimate reinvestments in infrastructure, or merely a form of legalized extortion designed to squeeze the last few drops of value from a peasant's labor. On one hand, maintaining a bridge in a flood-prone valley is genuinely expensive and requires skilled carpentry. On the other hand, when the Lord uses the toll money to buy a hawk and a fancy velvet hat, while the bridge is literally held together by moss and hope, the public works argument starts to feel a bit thin. You realize that in this world, nature has been privatized. The river is no longer a force of nature, it's a revenue stream, pun absolutely intended. You sigh and reach into your small hemp pouch, pulling out a tiny, thin silver penny. It feels heartbreakingly light. This coin represents hours of back-breaking work in the fields, and now it's going to a man whose only job is to stand in a hut and look disappointed in you. You hand it over, and he grants you passage. As you walk across the creaking timbers, you look down at the water. You see women from the village kneeling on the rocks, beating laundry against the stones. They aren't exempt either. In some jurisdictions, if you use the river to wash your clothes, you might be charged a disturbing the flow fee. It's like being charged for data roaming just because you walked past a cell tower. Everything is a transaction. The bridge groans under your weight, and for a second, you wonder if this is the day the maintenance finally fails. You think back to the bread oven from earlier. Remember that mulcher fee you paid in dough? Well, this bridge toll is just a liquid version of that. The Lord has realized that people have to move just as much as they have to eat. By placing a gate at every natural bottleneck, a bridge, a mountain pass, a narrow forest track, he has effectively turned the earth into a giant game of Monopoly, where he owns all the squares and you're just the little silver thimble trying not to go bankrupt. You finally reach the other side, your boots squelching with every step. You pass a group of merchants with a pack horse, and they look even more miserable than you. They're being hit with thorough toll, a tax on every head of livestock and every bale of wool that crosses the Lord's land. If they want to stop and rest, there's probably a groundage fee for the privilege of letting their horse stand on the dirt. It makes you realize that being a peasant is actually cheaper than being a businessman, mostly because you have nothing left for them to take. It's like the difference between a free-to-play mobile game and one where you're constantly hounded for microtransactions. Either way, the house always wins. The smell of the river, that mix of rotting vegetation, damp mud, and the distant tang of wood smoke clings to you. It's a sensory reminder that you're constantly moving through someone else's property. Even the fish jumping in the water are off limits. If you were to drop a line and catch one of those silver-bellied trout for your dinner, you'd be a poacher. The fish belong to the Lord. The water they swim in belongs to the Lord. The air that ripples the surface, honestly, he's probably working on a way to tax that too. You walk away from the bridge, the sound of the rushing water fading behind you, replaced by the rhythmic squish-squish of your wet footwear. You're heading toward the edge of the forest now, where the free resources of the earth are supposed to be. But you know better. You've already paid for your heat and your passage. Now you have to deal with the fact that even a fallen branch is a legal liability. The Lord's reach is long and his ledger is never full. You find yourself wondering if there was ever a time when a person could just exist without a license, or if free is just a word poets use to describe things they haven't tried to tax yet. You take another bite of your bread. It's colder now, the crust harder, but the grit of the sand reminds you of the mill you'll have to visit next week. You're already calculating the cost in your head. 1/16 for the grain, a penny for the bridge, a handful of flour for the oven. By the time you actually sit down to eat, you're basically consuming a tiny edible pile of taxes. It's enough to make you want to scream, but you shouldn't. The Lord might charge you a noise pollution fee for disturbing the peace of his valley. You leave the creaking bridge behind, the sound of the rushing water fading into a dull roar as you head toward the dark, jagged silhouette of the forest. Your stomach growls, a reminder that your half-baked rye loaf is mostly a promise of future disappointment. You have a small sack of grain back at your cottage, but to turn it into something edible, you're supposed to take it to the Lord's mill. It's a massive, water-powered beast that grinds grain with all the grace of a falling mountain. But the Lord's mill is laggy, to put it in modern terms. You'll wait 3 days in line, pay a massive mulcher fee, and likely get back flour that's 20% sawdust and 5% floor sweepings. Hidden under a pile of damp straw in the corner of your hut is a secret. It's a hand mill or a quern. 2 circular stones that you can spin by hand to grind your own flour. Using it feels like jailbreaking a phone or pirating a movie. It's a quiet act of rebellion against a system that wants to tax your every movement. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval lords fiercely protected their milling monopolies, often banning the ownership of hand mills entirely to ensure peasants had no choice but to use the official, taxable mill. If the Lord's bailiff finds those stones, he won't just take them. In a quirky and fringe display of medieval property rights enforcement, some bailiffs would literally smash the quernstones and use the shards to pave the threshold of the Lord's manor. Every time the Lord walked into his house, he'd be stepping on the shattered remains of his tenants' independence. It's a power move that would make a modern billionaire's legal team weep with envy. But you aren't thinking about the mill right now. You're thinking about the cold. Your cottage is a drafty collection of mud and sticks, and the damp is starting to settle into your bones like a persistent debt collector. You need firewood. You look toward the greenwood, a place that looks like a lush, inviting park in the stories, but in reality, it's a high-security vault. In the old days, the forest was just the forest. If a branch fell, you picked it up. If you needed a sapling for a fence post, you cut one. Not anymore. Now, every oak, ash, and thorn bush is the king's forest or the Lord's chase. You step over the boundary line, an invisible fence guarded by the threat of a heavy fine or a stint in the stocks. You aren't looking for a whole tree. You aren't that suicidal. You're looking for dead wood. This is where we get the phrase by hook or by crook. You're legally allowed to take only the wood you can reach with a shepherd's crook or a harvesting hook. Basically, the stuff that's already dead and hanging low. Anything else is vert. the green wood, and touching it is the medieval version of Grand Theft Auto. The Lord has turned the act of staying warm into a licensed activity. You need a fuel right or a specific license to gather, which, of course, isn't free. As you forage, the forest feels alive with eyes. The foresters, the Lord's park rangers, are notoriously grumpy men who get a commission on every fine they levy. They aren't looking for major criminals, they're looking for someone like you who might be tempted to tuck a particularly straight hazel branch under your cloak. Historians still argue whether these forest laws were an early, unintentional form of environmental conservation or if they were purely a tool for class warfare designed to strip the peasantry of their traditional rights to the land's bounty. To you, it doesn't feel like conservation. It feels like the Lord has put a paywall on the very earth itself. The smell of the forest is intoxicating. Damp moss, decaying leaves, and the sharp, clean scent of pine. It should be a sanctuary, but instead, it's a crime scene waiting to happen. You find a few fallen branches of birch, their silver bark peeling like old parchment. You snap them into manageable length, the sound echoing in the stillness like a gunshot. Every crack of a twig makes you jump. You feel like a common thief for trying to keep your family from freezing. It's a bizarre reality where nature's excess is the Lord's assets. If a deer were to run past you right now, you'd have to look away. Touching a royal beast is a capital offense. Even the grass under your feet is a commodity. You remember the crocodile dung sunscreen. From the stories of ancient times, at least that was a weird choice people made for themselves. Here, the weirdness is forced upon you by a ledger. You realize that the Lord's forest isn't a forest. It's a private members-only club, where the entry fee is your dignity and the monthly dues are paid in licensing fees for sticks. You manage to gather a decent bundle, tying it together with a length of rough twine. It's heavy and awkward, the rough bark scratching at your hands, but it's the only way you'll have a fire tonight. As you emerge from the tree line, clutching your bundle of licensed sticks, you see the Lord's hunting party in the distance. They're riding sleek, well-fed horses, their colorful tunics standing out against the drab brown of the winter fields. They're heading into the forest to kill for sport the very animals you aren't even allowed to look at. It's a stark reminder of the terms of service of your life. They get the venison and the glory, you get the dry twigs and a sore back. You trudge back toward your village, the bundle of wood weighing you down. You pass the common grazing land, or what used to be the common grazing land. Now, it's a patchwork of fences and no trespassing signs, in spirit, if not in literal text. You see a neighbor's cow looking longingly at a patch of lush green clover that's just behind a new stone wall. That clover is private property now. If that cow so much as sneezes on it, there's a fee. It's like the Lord has taken the entire world and put it behind a premium tier subscription. You're living in the free version of the world, which mostly involves being cold, hungry, and constantly reminded of what you can't have. The sun is beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the mud. You're exhausted, your feet are wet, and your free firewood feels like it weighs 100 pounds. But as you reach your cottage, you see a thin wisp of smoke coming from a neighbor's chimney. They must have found some dead wood too. It's a small, shared victory. You'll go inside, light a tiny fire, and maybe, just maybe, use those secret cornstones to make some flour that doesn't taste like the Lord's front porch. You just have to make sure the bailiff isn't listening for the clack, clack, clack of your rebellion. After all, the only thing more expensive than a tax is the fine for trying to avoid it. You shift the heavy bundle of licensed sticks on your shoulder. the rough bark digging into your collarbone through your thin, itchy wool tunic. As you walk past the village green, you notice something that wasn't there last month. A new wattle and daub fence, sharp and sturdy, cutting right through the heart of the meadow. This was the common, the place where for generations any villager could turn out a cow or a few scrawny sheep to nibble on the grass. Now, it looks like a gated community for the Lord's own prize livestock. You see your neighbor, Watt, standing by the fence with his single, rib-thin goat. He looks like a man trying to figure out a complex math problem, but the math is simple. The Lord has enclosed the land. In the old days, the grass was just grass. It grew by the grace of God and the rain, and your animals ate it. But the Lord has realized that every blade of green is a tiny, edible penny. This is a mainstream historical fact. The process of enclosure began as lords realized that private, fenced-off pastures were far more profitable for wool production than letting a bunch of peasant, scruffy goats roam free. If you want your goat to eat that common grass now, you have to pay a herbage or adjustment fee. It's like a parking garage for your lunch. You aren't paying for your service. You're paying for the privilege of your animal not starving to death on your own doorstep. It's the medieval version of a data cap. You get a certain amount of grazing data for free, but once a lord fences it off, every megabyte of clover comes with an overage charge. The smell of sheep is everywhere, an oily, lanolin-heavy scent mixed with the pungent aroma of manure. It's the smell of the Lord's wealth. You watch a flock of the Lord's sheep moving like a slow, fluffy cloud across a restricted zone. They look well-fed and smug. Meanwhile, your neighbor, Watt, has to lead his goat down to the dusty, trampled roadside to find a few yellowed weeds. If that goat so much as sticks its nose through the fence to grab a stray buttercup, the Lord's beetle will be there faster than a moderator in a banned Discord server to levy a fine. Everything has been monetized. Even the wasteland, the bogs and the scrub now has a price tag if you want to let your pigs root around for acorns. As you pass Watt and his sad goat, your mind drifts to something even more personal than grass. Your daughter, Elsbeth. She's reached the age where the young men in the village have started lingering near your cottage, trying to look impressive while mostly just looking like they need a bath. Specifically, there's a boy from the next manor over who has been making eyes at her. In a normal world, this would be a matter for you, your wife, and perhaps the village priest. But you live in a world where your family's very existence is a line item on someone else's balance sheet. To get Elsbeth married, you have to deal with the merchet. The merchet is the Lord's marriage tax. It's one of the most intimate ways the feudal system crawls into your bed. Because you are unfree, a villain, or a serf, you are technically an asset of the manor. When your daughter marries someone from another lord's land, the Lord loses a potential worker and any future children she might have produced. He views your daughter's reproductive potential like a company views a patent. If that patent moves to a competitor, someone has to pay a transfer fee. It's like a professional athlete being traded to another team, except instead of a multi-million-dollar contract, Elsbeth gets a muddy hut and you get a bill for 3 silver shillings. Historians still argue whether the infamous jus primae noctis, the rite of the first night where the Lord supposedly got to sleep with a bride before her husband, was ever a real legal practice or just a spicy bit of propaganda cooked up by later writers to make the Middle Ages seem more savage. Most evidence suggests it's a total myth, but the merchant was very, very real. It was a cold, hard financial transaction. You have to go to the manorial court, stand before the Lord Steward, and literally buy your daughter's freedom to love. It's the ultimate pay-to-play mechanic for human relationships. And it gets weirder. If Elsbeth were to skip the wedding and just get into trouble on her own, the Lord still gets his cut. In a truly quirky and fringe bit of medieval law, there was a fine called Lehrweit, or Lecherweit. If an unfree woman was caught having sex outside of marriage, she or her father had to pay a fine to the Lord. Why? Because she had devalued herself as a marriageable asset and potentially cheated the Lord out of his merchet fee. It's the medieval equivalent of being fined for damaging the merchandise. The Lord doesn't care about your morality, he cares about his return on investment. It's deeply cynical and it makes you want to spit in the mud, but you won't because the Lord probably owns the mud too. You reach your cottage, a small slump building that smells of old straw and wood smoke. You drop the wood by the door and look at your small garden patch. Even here, you aren't safe. If you want to sell the extra cabbages you grew, you can't just set up a stand by the road. You have to go to the Lord's market and pay a stallage fee. If you want to brew a batch of ale to celebrate the taxed wedding, you have to pay the ale toll. It feels like the air is getting thinner, or maybe it's just that every breath you take is being logged by a guy with a quill and a very long memory. You think about the crocodile dung sunscreen again. At least the Egyptians were trying to protect themselves from the sun. Here, the only thing you're trying to protect yourself from is the Lord's ledger. You go inside and see Elsbeth stirring a pot of thin pottage. She looks happy, humming a little tune, unaware that her future happiness is currently being calculated in the manor house up the hill. You realize that in this world, even I do comes with a value-added tax. You sit down on a three-legged stool, which, thankfully, the Lord hasn't found a way to tax yet, and wonder if there will ever be a time when a person can just be a person, without being a unit of production in a velvet-lined spreadsheet. The fire you light with your licensed wood flickers casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It's warm for now, but you know that tomorrow morning the sun will rise. The Lord's beetle will be out on his rounds, and you'll have to figure out how to pay for the privilege of simply existing in the spot where you were born. It's a heavy thought to sleep on, like a blanket made of lead and silver coins. You wake up the next morning to the sound of a distant ringing bell. It's not the church calling you to pray for your soul, although your soul could probably use the help. It's the market bell. Today is the one day a week when the village transforms from a muddy cluster of hovels into a slightly more crowded, slightly noisier, muddy cluster of hovels. You've spent the last few days trying to pretend the Lord's ledger doesn't exist, but today you're walking right into the heart of his accounting department. You have a small basket of surplus eggs and a few links of sausage that haven't turned suspicious yet. You're hoping to trade them for some salt or maybe a new iron needle for your wife, but in the Middle Ages, trading is a high-risk financial maneuver. As you approach the village square, you see the temporary stalls being erected. It looks a bit like a modern farmer's market, but with significantly more lice and zero artisanal sourdough that hasn't been taxed into oblivion. Before you can even set foot in the square, you hit the first paywall. Standing at the entrance is the Lord's bailiff, looking particularly smug in a fur-trimmed surcoat. He's collecting gate toll. This isn't a fee for a service, it's literally a tax on the act of walking from one patch of dirt to another. It's like a convenience fee for a website that you're forced to use because there are no other options. You hand over a tiny copper farthing just to pass the threshold. Once inside, the real fun begins. You can't just put your basket down on the ground and start shouting about your eggs. That would be stallage. If you want to occupy a few square feet of the Lord's earth with a table or a bench, you have to pay for the privilege. In some places, they even had a piquage fee, a tax for the right to break the ground to put in the stakes for your stall. It's the medieval equivalent of being charged a setup fee by a venue that already charges you 30% of your ticket sales. You decide to keep your basket on your arm to save a few coins, which means by noon, your shoulder is going to feel like it's being gnawed on by a very persistent badger. The market is a sensory overload. The smell of wet wool, roasting pig, and the sharp, vinegary scent of cheap wine fills the air. It's loud, it's chaotic, and everyone is trying to cheat everyone else. But the Lord is the biggest cheater of all. This is a mainstream historical fact. The right to hold a market was a royal franchise granted to a lord, giving him a total monopoly on trade within a certain radius, usually about 6 miles. This meant you couldn't just start a rival market in your backyard. If you tried to sell your eggs to a neighbor on the way to the market, that was forestalling, a crime that could land you in the pillory. The Lord wanted every transaction to happen under his nose so he could take his cut. Speaking of taking a cut, let's talk about the most important commodity in the village, beer. Because the water in the local stream is essentially a liquid history of the village's plumbing issues, everyone drinks ale. It's liquid bread, it's breakfast, and it's the only thing that makes a 14-hour workday bearable. You've been brewing a small batch at home, hoping to sell a few jugs to the travelers passing through, but you forgot about the ale taster. In a quirky and fringe bit of medieval consumer protection, the Lord appointed an official ale taster. This man's job was to ensure that no one was selling vile ale or overcharging the public, but the method of testing was unique. Legend has it the ale taster would wear leather breeches, pour a bit of the ale onto a wooden bench, and sit in it. If, after a few minutes, his pants stuck to the bench, it meant the brewer had added too much sugar or honey to hide the fact that the beer was basically swamp water. If he got stuck, you got a massive fine called an ale amerciament. It's the medieval version of a health inspector, but with more sticky pants and less paperwork. You watch as the ale taster makes his rounds, looking like a man who has spent far too much time sitting in puddles of booze. He's the ultimate gatekeeper of the local economy. Even if your ale is perfect, you still have to pay the ale toll for every gallon you brew for sale. It's like a liquor license that you have to renew every single time you turn on the stove. Historians still argue whether these market regulations, known as the assize of bread and ale, were actually intended to protect the poor from being cheated by greedy merchants, or if they were simply a sophisticated way for the Lord to ensure that no penny moved in the village without him getting a fraction of it. It's a debate between paternalistic protection and rent-seeking exploitation, and honestly, as you stand there with your aching shoulder and your taxed eggs, it feels a lot more like the latter. The sun is high now, and the seating fees are starting to make sense. Everyone is exhausted and wants to sit down, but the only benches belong to the tavern, which is owned by, you guessed it, the Lord. If you want to rest your weary bones, you have to buy a drink, which is taxed, and sit on a bench, which you effectively rented. It's a total ecosystem of extraction. You look at a group of traveling players performing a puppet show in the corner of the square. They're probably paying a performance tax or a license to entertain. Even the joy in this village has a line item in the ledger. You finally manage to trade your eggs for a small bag of salt, which is also heavily taxed, of course, and a bit of iron. As you pack your things to leave, you realize that the free market is anything but. You've paid to enter, you've paid to stand, and the person you traded with had to pay to be there too. By the time the salt reaches your kitchen, its price has been inflated by a dozen different medieval microtransactions. It's enough to make you want to go home, lock your door, and never come out again. But the Lord would probably charge you a hearth tax for the smoke coming out of your chimney. The sensory details of the market begin to fade as the afternoon sun dips. The shouting of the vendors, the smell of the fried dough, and the constant, nagging worry about your coin purse follow you as you trudge back towards your hut. You've survived another market day, but your pouch is lighter and your heart is a bit heavier. You're living in a world where the Lord doesn't just own the land, He owns the very concept of opportunity. As you walk past the village cross, you see a notice being read aloud. It's about a new levy for the king's wars. It seems that being taxed for your bread and your beer isn't enough. Now you have to pay for the privilege of someone else going off to fight a war you don't understand. You tighten your grip on your salt bag and keep walking. The feudal system is a long, slow grind, much like the millstones you're forced to use. But as the shadows lengthen, your mind starts to wander. You've heard stories of a different kind of power, one that didn't rely on local lords and village brawls, but on a massive, disciplined machine of iron and stone. You've heard of the Romans, and specifically, you've heard of a legion that carried the sign of the boar, a group of men who didn't just tax the world, they reshaped it in their own bloody image. But that's a journey for another night. Once you've managed to swallow this expensive, salty bread, you leave the muddy, tax-ridden lanes of the 13th century behind, the smell of damp wool and overpriced rye fading as the air begins to change. The chill of the English drizzle is replaced by a sudden, sharp heat that smells of salt spray, sun-baked cedar, and the metallic tang of oiled iron. You aren't a peasant anymore. You aren't worried about the merchet or the four banal. Instead, you feel a weight on your shoulders that isn't a bundle of sticks. It's the heavy, overlapping plates of lorica segmentata armor. You are standing on the deck of a Roman galley in the year 36 BC, and you are part of something much larger, much more dangerous, and significantly more organized than a village squabble over a bread oven. Welcome to the 10th Legion. In the world of ancient Rome, being in the 10th was like having a gold-plated resume. This is the brand name of the Roman military, but specifically, you belong to Legio ex Fretensis. Now, historians still argue whether this specific 10th Legion was the direct reincarnated soul of Julius Caesar's famous Legio ex Equestris, his favorite ride or die unit, or if it was a new creation built by his heir Octavian from the scattered remains of the old guard. Either way, you carry the weight of that 10 on your shield like an elite athlete wearing a retired Legends jersey. There's a standard to uphold, and that standard usually involves a lot of sweat and a very high probability of ending up as a footnote in a victory column. The sun is beating down on the Straits of Messina, the narrow, treacherous water between Italy and Sicily. This is where your legion earned its nickname, Fretenses, which basically means the guys from the strait. You aren't just a foot soldier. You're a Roman Marine. It's less like a standard army and more like an ancient version of the Navy SEALs. If the SEALs wore leather sandals and spent their downtime eating hardtack that could double as a construction material. This is a mainstream historical fact. The 10th played a pivotal role in the naval battles against Sextus Pompeius, the man who was essentially a pirate king holding Rome's grain supply hostage. You weren't just marching through dust, you were boarding enemy ships, leaping across wooden planks while wearing 40 pounds of iron and trying not to drown in the Mediterranean. The sensory experience is overwhelming. The rhythm of the oars hitting the water, thump, splash, is the heartbeat of your world. It's a hypnotic, ASMR-inducing sound that masks the fact that you're about to engage in a high-speed collision with another ship. You can smell the vinegar water in your canteen, which Romans called posca. It's not exactly a craft cocktail. It's more like angry Gatorade, designed to kill bacteria and keep you just hydrated enough to kill someone else. You adjust your helmet, the wool padding inside damp with sweat. Your healthcare plan in the Legion is basically don't get hit. And if you do, hope the camp doctor has had enough wine to forget he's using a dirty bronze saw. You look at the standards being held high on the deck. While other legions might have a generic eagle or a noble lion, your legion has two very distinct symbols, the boar and the dolphin. It's a bit of a weird aesthetic choice, like a football team choosing a mascot that is half bacon, half flipper. But in the Roman mind, it makes perfect sense. The boar represents the ferocity and stubbornness of the infantry, the guys who refuse to move an inch even when a forest of spears is flying at them. The dolphin and the galley represent your mastery of the sea. You are the ultimate multimodal force. You can drown you in the morning and trample you by lunch. In a quirky and fringe bit of Roman military culture, soldiers of the 10th were known to be incredibly superstitious about their gear. Some legionaries believed that if you didn't polish your shield until you could see your own terrified reflection, the goddess Fortuna wouldn't be able to find you on the battlefield. You spend hours with a rag and a bit of sand, rubbing the bronze boss of your shield. It's a meditative, mindless task that helps you ignore the fact that the Roman Empire is currently tearing itself apart in a series of civil wars. You're not fighting for a country in the modern sense. You're fighting for the man who pays you, the man whose face is on the coins that, unlike the medieval peasant's silver, actually seem to hold their value. The legionary life is a study in organized misery. When you aren't fighting, you're digging. You've heard the joke that the Roman army was just a construction company that occasionally killed people. Every night, no matter how tired you are, you have to build a fortified camp. You dig a trench, you build a wall, you set up the tents in a perfect grid. It's the ultimate SimCity experience, but with more shovels and less electricity. Comparing a Roman legion to a modern corporation isn't actually that far off. You have a clear hierarchy, a branding department, the standards, a logistics wing that would make Amazon jealous, and a very aggressive, hostile takeover policy. As the ships close in for the final push against Sextus Pompeius, the atmosphere on deck tightens. The jokes about the angry Gatorade die down. You check the tie on your caligae, those heavy-duty sandals. They're studded with iron nails to give you grip on the blood-slicked wooden decks of the galleys. Historians still argue whether these nails were actually bad for your feet over long marches. But on a ship, they're the difference between standing your ground and sliding into the sea. You feel a strange sense of pride. You aren't a serf bound to a small patch of mud. You are a citizen soldier, or at least you're getting there, a part of the iron board that is about to sink a pirate fleet. The Roman world is vast, and the 10th is destined for more than just sea battles. You've heard rumors that once the situation in Italy is settled, the legion might be headed east. There's a province called Judea that is apparently prone to unrest, which is Roman shorthand for people who really don't want to pay our taxes. You find it ironic. Whether it's 36 BC or 1250 AD, the story always seems to involve someone in power wanting a piece of what you have. But for now, the only tax you are worried about is the one paid in blood on the deck of a ship. You grip your pilum, the heavy javelin designed to bend upon impact so the enemy can't throw it back. It's a masterpiece of engineering, much like the Legion itself. You look out over the blue expanse of the Mediterranean, the white foam of the wake trailing behind like a silk ribbon. The world feels open, dangerous, and strangely beautiful. You're a long way from a medieval bread oven, but as you watch the boar standard ripple in the wind, you realize that history is just a series of different ways to organize the same human chaos. Tonight, you'll sleep on a hard wooden deck under a canopy of stars, dreaming of the day your service is over and you finally get that plot of land you were promised. Hopefully, one without a bridge toll. The salt spray of the Mediterranean is a distant memory now, replaced by heat so dry and aggressive it feels like the sun is trying to peel the skin right off your nose. You aren't on the deck of a galley anymore. You are standing on a dusty ridge overlooking the city of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD. The air doesn't smell like the sea, it smells of pulverized limestone, cedar smoke, and the metallic tang of 100,000 men living in close quarters without a single bottle of deodorant in sight. You are still part of the 10th Legion, the Iron Boar, but your job description has shifted from Marine to Demolition Expert. If the Roman army is a giant, slow-moving corporation, the 10th has just been promoted to the High-Velocity Urban Renewal Department. You lean against the wooden frame of a ballista, one of the massive bolt throwers that look like a giant crossbow had a child with a piece of heavy construction equipment. Your hands are calloused, stained with the dark. Grease used to lubricate the torsion springs. These springs aren't made of steel. They're made of tightly twisted bundles of animal sinew and, occasionally, human hair. There's something deeply unsettling about the fact that your long-range artillery is powered by biological waste. But in the Roman world, if it works, it's innovation. This is a mainstream historical fact. The 10th Legion was the undisputed master of Roman siegecraft, bringing an engineering precision to warfare that wouldn't be seen again for 1,000 years. While the rebels inside the city are fighting for their lives, you are essentially landscaping the surrounding hills into a nightmare of ramps and towers. You watch as your fellow legionaries haul a massive stone onto the loading tray of an onager. The onager, named after a wild ass because of its kick when it fires, is the Roman version of a heavy-duty mortar. It doesn't fire bolts. It fires smooth, round rocks the size of a modern bowling ball. But these stones aren't just any color. They are a brilliant, blinding white carved from the local limestone. In a quirky and fringe bit of battlefield psychology, the Jewish defenders on the walls eventually learned to spot these white stones against the blue Judean sky. They would cry out, "The sun is coming," a pun on the Hebrew words for stone and sun, allowing everyone to dive for cover. When the Romans realized their projectiles were being tracked like a bad Wi-Fi signal, they started painting the stones black so they couldn't be seen until they were halfway through someone's roof. It's the ancient version of stealth technology, but involving a bucket of soot and a lot of manual labor. The sound of the siege is a constant rhythmic pounding. The creak of the massive wooden towers being rolled forward on iron-rimmed wheels sounds like the world is literally being torn apart. These towers are multi-story monsters covered in raw, wet hides to prevent the defenders from setting them on fire. Inside, you can hear the muffled shouts of your brothers as they prepare to drop the boarding ramps onto the city walls. It's like a medieval elevator ride where the lobby is a forest of spears. You adjust your helmet, the sweat stinging your eyes. The 10th is famous for its brutality, but standing here, you realize that brutality is mostly just a byproduct of incredible organization. You aren't just attacking. You are systematically dismantling a city, brick by brick, bolt by bolt. Historians still argue whether the destruction of the Second Temple, the heart of the city, was a deliberate command from the Roman commander Titus to break the spirit of the rebellion, or if it was a chaotic accident where a single soldier's torch got out of hand. To you, standing in the dust and the heat, it doesn't really matter whose fault it was. You see the smoke rising in a thick, greasy pillar that blots out the sun. The sensory detail is overwhelming. The roar of the fire, the screaming of the wind as it's sucked into the thermal updraft. and the shimmering heat that makes the stone walls of the city look like they're melting. It's a vision of the end of the world, brought to you by the Roman logistics department. Comparing this to modern warfare is almost too easy. You are the heavy artillery support. Your ballista is a supersonic sniper rifle that can put a bolt through 3 men at a distance of 400 yards. The siege ramp being built up the side of the city's defenses is basically a man-made mountain, a software update to the landscape that makes walls irrelevant. You feel like a small part of a very large, very angry machine. There's no sarcasm in the way you handle your equipment. You treat that ballista with more respect than you treat your own bunkmate. If it breaks, the rebels get a chance to breathe, and the 10th doesn't like giving people room to breathe. The smell of the camp at night is a mix of charred meat, cheap wine, and the pungent aroma of garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything. It's like the ancient world's version of ketchup, if ketchup were made of rotting guts and could be smelled from 3 miles away. You sit by the fire, your muscles aching from a day of hauling stones. You think back to the merchant tax from the medieval world we visited earlier. At least those peasants were being squeezed for money. You are being squeezed for your very soul, one siege work at a time. The 10th doesn't just take your coins, it takes your peace of mind and replaces it with the sound of snapping sinew and crashing stone. You look at the boar standard planted in the dirt outside the commander's tent. It looks different in the firelight, meaner, more solid. You've heard that once this city falls, the Legion isn't going anywhere. You won't be heading back to a cozy villa in Italy. Instead, the 10th is going to become the permanent property. Managers of these ruins, you're going to be an occupying force in a land that hates you, living in the very dust you created. It's a career path that sounds less like a promotion and more like a life sentence. But as you watch another white stone sail through the air, arching like a falling star towards the flickering fires of the city, you realize that the Roman way isn't about getting it over with. It's about staying until the world forgets there was ever anything else here besides Rome. The ground shivers as a section of the outer wall finally gives way, collapsing in a roar of dust and limestone. The cheer that goes up from the legionaries is low and guttural, a sound of relief rather than joy. The engineering part is almost done. Soon it will be time for the street-level interactions, which in the 10th Legion usually involves a lot of short swords and very little negotiation. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to find a second of silence in the cacophony of the siege. You're a long way from the free bread and the bridge tolls of the future, but the machinery of power feels exactly the same. It just has better hardware in 70 AD. Jerusalem has finally fallen, and the silence that follows is louder than the catapults ever were. The air is thick with the scent of victory, which in this case smells like a campfire that's been put out with stagnant water and old masonry dust. You stand on the ruins of the upper city, looking down at what used to be a bustling metropolis. Now, it's a giant, stone-cold jigsaw puzzle that someone has smashed with a hammer. You are a member of the 10th Legion, and while your brothers in other units are packing their tents to head back to more civilized assignments, you've just received the ultimate participation trophy. You're staying. For the next century and a half, this place is your home. You've gone from an elite siege unit to the world's most heavily armed property management team. You kick a piece of charred cedar out of your path. Your sandals, those iron-studded caligoi, crunch on the pulverized limestone that seems to coat everything like a layer of gray. Snow. This is a mainstream historical fact. Legio X Fretensis was the only legion stationed in Judea after the war, making Jerusalem their permanent headquarters. They didn't just build a camp, they transformed the ruins into a Roman fortress. It's a bit like taking a historic, beautifully crafted neighborhood and turning it into a Roman-themed, brutalist parking garage. You aren't just soldiers anymore. You are the physical manifestation of the occupation. Life in the ruins is a strange mix of boredom and high alert paranoia. You spend your mornings on patrol, walking through streets that have no names and past houses that have no roofs. You can still see the scorched marks on the stones where the fire of the 10th torches licked the walls. It's a bit awkward, really. You're the guys who burned the place down, and now you're the guys responsible for making sure the ruins don't catch fire again. Historians still argue whether the destruction was as total as the historian Josephus claimed, who said the city was leveled so completely that a traveler wouldn't believe it had ever been inhabited, or if there were pockets of survivors living in the shadows of the Roman towers. To you, it feels pretty empty. You are the ghosts in the machine of a dead city, but Romans can't just live in a pile of rocks. You need infrastructure. Specifically, you need a bathhouse, because the 10th hasn't had a good soak since the siege began 4 years ago. You're part of the construction detail today, and this is where you encounter a quirky and fringe bit of Roman military branding. You are working at the Legion's massive brick and tile factory located at Givat Ram, just west of the city. Every single brick you bake, every roof tile you press, and every section of ceramic pipe for the new Roman bath has to be stamped. You take a wooden seal and press it into the wet clay, LXF, with a tiny angry boar next to it. It's an ancient version of Intel. Inside, or putting a designer logo on a t-shirt. Thousands of years from now, people will dig up these tiles and know exactly who was in charge. It's a very Roman way of marking territory, less like a dog and a fire hydrant and more like a corporation putting its logo on every single coffee cup in the office. Every time you take a hot bath or walk over a tile floor, you are stepping on the boar of the 10th. It's branding as a form of dominance. You're telling the land, we didn't just conquer you, we literally rebuilt you in our image, right down to the plumbing. The sensory details of the brickworks are a welcome break from the dust of the city. The smell of wet clay is earthy and cool, a sharp contrast to the baking heat of the Judean sun. You watch the smoke rise from the massive kilns, a steady industrial rhythm that replaces the chaotic smoke of the siege. You've traded your pylum for a trowel and your angry Gatorade for local wine that's been watered down until it's basically just grape-flavored disappointment. You spend your nights in a barracks built on the foundations of a king's palace, sleeping on a straw mattress that's probably older than your military career. Comparing your life now to a modern peacekeeping mission is a bit of a stretch, because peace in the Roman world is defined as everyone is too tired or too dead to fight back. You are the iron boar sitting on a pile of rubble, waiting for the next generation of rebels to get brave. And they will. You've heard whispers of a man they call Bar Kokhba, a name that means son of a star. It's a romantic, hopeful name, the kind of name that usually leads to a lot of work for the 10th Legion's engineering department. You know that eventually the star will meet the boar and you'll have to pull those black painted stones out of storage again. There's a certain sarcasm in the way you look at the new Roman Jerusalem, now officially renamed Aelia Capitolina. The Emperor Hadrian decided to wipe the old name off the map entirely. It's like a rebranding exercise where the marketing team decides to change a legendary name to something corporate and forgettable. You walk past a brand new temple to Jupiter that sits exactly where the old temple used to be. It's a power move that feels like a middle finger carved in marble. You're the security guard for this new, shiny, forced reality. It's a long-term gig with no exit strategy, and sometimes you miss the sea breezes of the Straits of Messina. The ASMR of your life is the steady clink 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 of chisels against stone. The Romans are obsessed with order. If a wall is crooked, it gets fixed. If a road doesn't go straight, it gets leveled. You're turning a land of ancient traditions into a grid of standardized Roman units. It's efficient, it's clean, and it's soul-crushingly repetitive. You think back to the medieval peasants we talked about earlier. They were oppressed by a local lord who wanted their bread dough. You are the oppressor, part of a global empire that wants the very soul of the landscape. Both systems are monopolies, but yours has better architecture and a much larger marketing budget. As the sun sets over the Judean hills, the sky turns a deep, bruised purple. You sit on the edge of a new Roman aqueduct, the water rushing beneath you with a soft, persistent hum. It's a peaceful sound, but you know better. Underneath that water, underneath the new tiles with the bore stamps, the memory of what was here before is still smoldering. You're the lid on a pressure cooker that's been boiling for 60 years. You tighten the straps on your sandals, feeling the cold iron nails against the stone. The 10th Legion isn't just a military unit, it's a permanent scar on the earth. And as you watch the first stars appear, you realize that in history, being the landlord of a ruin is just as exhausting as being the peasant paying the toll. Both are trapped in a cycle of maintenance, and the boar is never truly finished with its work. The dust of the Judean ruins settles in your mind, the white limestone fading into the damp, soot-stained timber of a medieval city gate. You are no longer an instrument of an empire. You are an aspiring member of a very different kind of power structure. The year is 1350, and you are standing in the middle of a bustling London street that smells like a mix of rotting cabbage, old leather, and a chimney sweep's bad day. You've traded your Roman armor for a thick wool tunic that's seen better decades, and instead of a sword, you're clutching a small sample of your work. You are trying to break into the world of the guilds, the medieval version of an exclusive, high-stakes country club that also happens to control every single penny moving through the local economy. Imagine a world where you can't just start a business. There's no Etsy, no side hustles, and definitely no disrupting the industry. In this city, if you want to make a pair of shoes, weave a bolt of cloth, or even bake a meat pie without being tossed into a dungeon, you have to be in. The guild is the ultimate gatekeeper. It's a monopoly so complete it would make a modern tech giant's legal team weep with joy. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval guilds controlled everything from the quality of the raw materials to the final price of the product, and even the wages of every single person involved in the process. It's like living in a town where the only app store is owned by a group of grumpy men in velvet robes who have a very specific set of rules about what color your icons can be. You stand outside the guild hall, a massive timber-framed building that looms over the street like a judgmental grandfather. The air inside smells of expensive beeswax candles and spilled ale. Lots of ale. You see, the guild isn't just a professional organization, it's a social club, a religious brotherhood, and a drinking society all rolled into one. In a quirky and fringe bit of medieval linguistics, the word trade was often interchangeable with mystery. This didn't mean they were solving crimes like a 14th century Sherlock Holmes. It comes from the Latin mysterium, meaning a craft or a skill. But the guilds leaned into the mystery part. They had secret handshakes, private oaths, and specialized terminology designed to keep the outsiders from figuring out how they did what they did. It was the original closed source software. To get into this exclusive club, you have to prove you aren't just a hack. You've heard the term masterpiece? That's not just a word for a great painting. In your world, it's a literal legal requirement. To move from a worker to a master, you have to produce a piece of work so perfect that the guild elders can't find a single flaw in it. If you're a blacksmith, it might be a lock that can't be picked. If you're a baker, it might be a loaf of bread that doesn't taste like the Lord's front porch. Remember our friend the Fournier? If your masterpiece fails, you're stuck in the freelancer zone forever, which in 1350 is a very cold and hungry place to be. Historians still argue whether guilds actually stifled technological innovation by being too protective of their old methods, or if they were the primary reason for the high standards of European craftsmanship that eventually paved the way for the Industrial Revolution. On one hand, the guild would literally fine you if you tried to use a new tool that they hadn't approved. On the other hand, they ensured that if you bought a guild-approved sword, it wouldn't snap the first time you hit something harder than a loaf of medieval bread. It's the ultimate debate between quality control and market stagnation. To you, though, it mostly feels like a lot of paperwork and a very long line to get a blue check mark next to your name. Comparing a medieval guild to a modern labor union is only half accurate. A union fights for the workers. A guild was the boss. They fixed prices so high that no one else could compete, and they fixed wages so low that no one could get rich enough to leave. It's like a professional licensing board that also happens to run the local police and the church choir. If you tried to sell your wares under the table, the guild's beadles would find you. They were the copyright enforcement team of the Middle Ages. They'd seize your unauthorized goods and burn them in the street as a warning. It's the medieval equivalent of getting a cease and desist letter, but with more actual fire and fewer lawyers. The sensory experience of the guild hall is one of heavy, dark wood and the low murmur of men discussing market share over silver tankards. Every guild had its own livery, a specific set of colors and robes that signaled your rank. Walking down the street in the wrong livery was like wearing a fake Rolex to a high-end watch convention. People would notice and they would be very, very annoyed. You feel the weight of the social hierarchy pressing down on you. In the Roman legion, you were a number. In the medieval village, you were a unit of production. Here in the city, you are a brother, but only if you can pay the entry fee and keep your mouth shut about the mysteries. There's a certain sarcasm in the way the guild elders talk about protecting the public. They'll tell you they're maintaining the just price, a medieval concept that things should have a stable, moral value rather than being subject to the whims of supply and demand. But funnily enough, the just price always seems to include a very healthy profit margin for the masters. It's like a price-fixing scandal that is perfectly legal because the people doing the fixing are also the ones writing the laws. If you want to play in their sandbox, you have to follow their rules. And rule number 1 is the guild always wins. You look at the sample in your hand, a finely stitched leather glove. You've spent months on it, your eyes aching from working by the light of a single flickering tallow candle that smells like a wet cow. You hope it's enough. You know that if you get in, you'll have a safety net. The guild takes care of its own. If you get sick, they'll pay for your medicine, which is usually just a polite way of saying herbs and prayer. If you die, they'll pay for your funeral and make sure your widow doesn't end up begging in the mud. It's a social security system that actually works, provided you're part of the club. As the sun sets over the gabled roofs of London, the city bells begin to toll. It's a rhythmic, heavy sound that marks the end of the working day, a day that is strictly regulated by the guild's terms of service. You tuck your glove back into your pouch and head toward the tavern. You've got a long road ahead of you before you can call yourself a master. You'll have to endure the long grind, series of ranks and tests that make a modern PhD look like a weekend workshop. But for now, you just want a drink that hasn't been taxed by a lord or quality checked by a man in a velvet hat. You're entering a world of structure and secret handshakes, and the bore of the 10th would probably respect the sheer, stubborn organization of it all. The doors of the guild hall creak shut behind you, and suddenly, the world feels very small and very dusty. You've just signed your life away. Well, the next 7 years of it, at least. You are officially an apprentice. If you thought being a peasant was a grind, welcome to the medieval version of an unpaid internship that never, ever ends. You aren't just learning a mystery or a trade, you are essentially becoming a domestic appliance with a pulse. Your master, a man with hands as rough as a brick and a temperament that suggests he hasn't slept since the late 1340s, looks you over like you're a piece of subpar lumber. You've traded your freedom for the chance to one day, maybe if the stars align and you don't mess up the glue pot, become a master yourself. This is a mainstream historical fact. The typical apprenticeship lasted 7 years, though it could range from 5 to 10 depending on the complexity of the craft. During this time, your master is legally your father. He is responsible for your food, your clothing, and your moral upbringing, which is medieval code for hitting you with a wooden spoon if you wake up late. You don't get a salary, you get a straw mattress in the corner of the workshop that smells vaguely of damp dog and cedar shavings. It's like living in a studio apartment where your boss is also your landlord and your warden. Your day starts before the sun even thinks about rising, usually with the task of sweeping up the shop dust. A fine powder of metal filings or sawdust that settles into your lungs and stays there until the Renaissance. The sensory details of the workshop are a rhythmic, dull ache. There's the constant scritch of a plane against wood, or the clink of a hammer, a sound that becomes a soundtrack to your dreams. You spend your first 2 years doing the jobs that even the shop cat wouldn't touch. You are the fetcher of water, the cleaner of the hearth, and the poker of the fire. It's less like a vocational school and more like a long-term endurance test designed to see if you'll break. Remember that bridge toll we talked about earlier? Well, your apprenticeship is a different kind of toll. You're paying with your youth instead of silver pennies. Your hands are constantly covered in blisters that never quite heal, turning into a thick, protective armor of callus. In a quirky and fringe bit of medieval workshop culture, many guilds had bizarre initiation rituals for new apprentices. In some masonry guilds, you might be baptized with a bucket of dirty water or forced to confess your sins to a piece of timber. It was a way of breaking down your identity before the guild built you back up as a brother. It's basically the 14th century version of fraternity hazing, but instead of a toga party, you get a lecture on the proper way to sharpen a chisel. If you survive the first few years without losing a finger or your mind, you might actually start learning the mysteries. This is when the master finally lets you see the source code, the secret ratios for mixing mortar, the specific way to temper steel, or the hidden seams in a leather boot. Historians still argue whether the journeyman system was a genuine ladder of social mobility or if it was intentionally designed to create a permanent underclass of skilled laborers who would never actually reach the rank of master. You see, after your 7 years of apprenticeship are up, You don't just get a certificate and a handshake, you become a journeyman. The word comes from the French journée, meaning day. You are now a day laborer. You are skilled. You are free to leave your master's house. But you aren't a master yet. You're in the gig economy of the 1300s. You wander from town to town looking for work, carrying your tools in a heavy leather pack that rubs your shoulders raw. This wandering phase was often called the tramping system. You'd show up at a new city, find the local guild-affiliated tavern, and show your credentials. Usually a specific secret handshake, or a piece of carved wood that proved you weren't a Cowan or an untrained hack. If there was work, you'd get a day's pay. If not, the guild would often give you a passing coin, a tiny amount of money to help you get to the next town. It's like a medieval version of LinkedIn, but instead of connecting with the clique, you have to walk 20 miles through the mud and hope the local master isn't a total jerk. The sarcasm of your situation isn't lost on you as you sit in a dusty tavern in a strange town, nursing a cup of ale that's been watered down so much it's basically just sad water. You're a skilled craftsman, but you're still just a unit moving through someone else's monopoly. You're constantly being quality checked by men who look at your work with the skepticism of a modern food critic looking at a gas station burrito. The stitching is a bit wide, isn't it? They'll say, while you try not to fall asleep into your pottage. You're saving every copper farthing for your masterpiece, the final project that will prove you belong at the top of the food chain. Comparing your masterpiece to a modern high-stakes reality TV finale is surprisingly accurate. You have to fund it yourself. You have to buy the expensive materials, the high-grade silk, the fine Italian steel, the aged oak, and you have to work on it in your spare time, which is a concept that barely exists. If you fail, you've wasted years of savings and you stay a journeyman forever, doomed to wander the roads until your knees give out. It's a winner-take-all system where the judges are the very people you'll be competing with for customers once you pass. Talk about a conflict of interest. You think back to the 10th Legion and their boar stamps on the bricks. They were part of a massive state-run machine. Here, you are part of a private community-run machine. Both want to control how things are made and who gets to make them. The Legion use iron and blood. The Guild uses mysteries and price fixing. Both are obsessed with standardization. You look at your worn, calloused hands and realize that history is just a series of different ways to make a person work really, really hard for the privilege of having a roof over their head. The ASMR of the night, the distant howl of a wolf beyond the city walls, the steady drip of rain from a thatched eave, lulls you toward a shallow sleep. You're tired in a way that goes deeper than your muscles. It's a fatigue of the soul. But tomorrow, you'll get up, you'll pick up your tools, and you'll continue the long grind. You're a journeyman now, a man of the road, a day man in a world of centuries-old traditions. You just hope that when the time comes to present your masterpiece, the guild elders are feeling generous, or at least that they've had enough of that expensive just price ale to be in a good mood. You've finally done it. You've presented your masterpiece, that leather glove so finely stitched it looks like it was grown rather than made. And you've survived the interrogation by the guild elders. You've paid your entry fee, which was roughly the price of a small cottage. And you've sworn an oath so long and complicated it felt like reading the terms and conditions for a new operating system. You are now a master. You have the right to wear the livery, to open your own shop, and to vote in the guild hall. But as you sit in your new workshop, the smell of fresh oil and tanned hide filling the room, You realize that being a boss doesn't mean you're free. It just means you've traded one set of chains for a much more expensive, velvet-lined collar. The guild is now your entire world. It's no longer just a place where you work. It's your insurance agent, your pension plan, and your local government. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval guilds functioned as the first real social safety nets in Europe. If you fall off a ladder and break your back, the guild will pay a weekly stipend to keep your family from eating their own boots. If your workshop burns down, a constant hazard in a world where everything is made of wood and lit by open flames, the common box of the guild will provide the capital to rebuild. It's like having a premium insurance policy, but instead of calling a 1-800 number, you have to attend a 3-hour meeting and drink a lot of tepid ale with 20 other guys named John. But the safety net comes with a very sharp set of teeth. The guild isn't just helping you, it's controlling you. You cannot lower your prices to attract more customers. That would be unfair competition. If the guild has decided the just price for a pair of gloves is 4 silver pennies, and you try to sell them for 3, you'll find yourself standing in the guild hall facing a fine that would make a Roman tax collector blush. It's a total monopoly. You're part of a cartel that ensures no one gets too rich, but also that no one goes under. It's like a modern price-fixing scandal, except it's perfectly legal and everyone is wearing a funny hat. Historians still argue whether guilds were actually efficient engines of economic stability that prevented race-to-the-bottom wages, or if they were just bloated cartels that held back the little guy and slowed down the clock of progress by centuries. The sensory experience of the master life is one of heavy, gold-leafed banners and the clink of the treasury key. Every year, you take part in the great guild procession. You wear your best robes, the itchy wool of your apprentice days replaced by heavy silk and fur. The air is thick with the smell of incense from the guild's private chapel. You see, the guild isn't just about business, it's about your soul. In a quirky and fringe bit of medieval culture, guilds were the primary producers of mystery plays. These weren't detective stories, they were massive community theater productions of Bible stories. And here's the kicker. The guilds were often cast based on their trade. The Baker's Guild would perform the Last Supper because, bread. The shipwrights would do Noah's Ark. The water drawers would do the Great Flood. It's like the ultimate corporate team building exercise, but with more chanting and a higher risk of someone falling off a wooden mountain. Imagine you're a member of the Goldsmiths Guild, and your mystery play involves the 3 wise men bringing gold to the manger. You're not just acting, you're branding. You're showing the entire city that your trade is literally divine. It's the medieval version of a Super Bowl commercial, but instead of 30 seconds of CGI, you get 6 hours of your neighbors dressed as angels and demons. Comparing a guild feast to a modern corporate retreat is actually quite fitting, except instead of a trust fall and a PowerPoint presentation, you get a roast swan, 3 gallons of spiced wine, and a very long speech about the glory of the craft. But remember those copyright strikes we talked about with the handmills? The guild takes that even further. They have searchers, men whose job is to prowl the city at night looking for unlawful work. If they see a light in your workshop after the curfew bell has rung, they'll break down your door. Working by candlelight was often banned because the quality might suffer, and the guild's reputation is more important than your hustle. They'll seize your tools, burn your defective goods, and maybe even expel you from the brotherhood. Without the guild, you are a non-person. You can't buy raw materials, you can't sell your finished products, and you lose your health insurance. It's the ultimate deplatforming. You think back to the 10th Legion and their Bohr stamp. They were obsessed with standard operating procedures to ensure their bricks didn't crumble under the weight of a palace. The guild is the same. They want every glove, every shoe, and every loaf of bread to be on brand. But where the Legion was a top-down military machine, the guild is a horizontal, peer-to-peer network of surveillance. Your best friend is also your competitor, and he's watching your stitching like a hawk. It's a community of support where everyone is also an undercover auditor. As you sit at the head of your table, watching your own apprentices sweep the floor, you feel a strange sense of déjà vu. You remember being that kid. You remember the merche tax your father had to pay for your sister and the pontage you paid at the bridge. You realize that you finally made it to the other side of the ledger. You are no longer the one being taxed. You are the one helping to set the rates. But the weight is still there. You have to pay into the guild's common box every month. You have to pay for the candles in the chapel. You have to pay for the mystery play costumes. The fees never actually go away. They just change names. The ASMR of your life has changed. It's no longer the clack-clack of a secret hand mill or the roar of a Roman catapult. It's the steady, rhythmic thump of the master's signet ring hitting a wax seal. It's a sound of a well-oiled machine that has been running for 300 years and intends to run for 300 more. You look at the apprentices sleeping in the corner and you almost feel sorry for them. They have 7 years of long grind ahead of them, and even if they make it, they'll just end up like you. A well-fed cog in a very golden machine. The fire in your hearth flickers, casting a warm glow over your leather working tools. You've achieved the medieval dream, but you can't help but notice the world outside. The guild hall is starting to change. There are merchants, men with new money who don't belong to any guild, who are starting to hire peasants in the countryside to do the work for half the price. They're bypassing your monopoly. They're disrupting your mystery. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the feeling that the just price might not be so just for much longer. For tonight, though, you are a master of the craft, a brother of the guild, and the roast swan you had at the feast is sitting very heavily in your stomach. It's a good kind of heavy, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where your next meal is coming from, even if you had to sign your soul over to a group of men in velvet hats to get it. You sit in your master's chair, the one with the carved oak back that used to make you feel like the king of your own little leather-bound world. But today the cushion feels a bit thinner. The air in the workshop is still thick with the scent of tanned hide and beeswax, but there's a new, colder draft blowing through the cracks in the timber. You're starting to realize that the mystery of your craft isn't quite as mysterious as it used to be. For centuries, the guild was an unshakable fortress, but the walls are starting to show some very expensive cracks. You're witnessing the messy, slow-motion car crash that is the birth of early capitalism. And it turns out, the just price is no match for a merchant with a fast horse and a complete lack of respect for your traditions. The disruption isn't coming from inside the city walls, it's coming from the countryside. This is a mainstream historical fact. As the medieval period waned, the putting out system began to dismantle the urban guild monopoly. Wealthy merchants, tired of paying the high prices dictated by your guild, started taking raw materials, like wool or leather, directly to the cottages of peasants in the rural villages. These peasants, who weren't bound by your 7-year apprenticeship or your livery fees, were happy to do the work for a fraction of the cost during their off-season. It's the medieval version of outsourcing. You're the high-end, unionized local shop, and the merchants have just discovered they can get the same thing made in a gig economy basement 30 miles away. It feels like a betrayal. You spent 7 years of your life as an apprentice being hit with a wooden spoon and sweeping up shop dust, only to find that some guy in a muddy hut who's never even seen a masterpiece is now your biggest competitor. You try to call in the guild's searchers to shut them down, but you realize your jurisdiction ends at the city gate. In a quirky and fringe bit of economic history, some cities actually saw clandestine workshops popping up in the suburbs, the areas just outside the city walls where the guild's reach was legally murky. These hedge craftsmen would work through the night selling their unauthorized goods to merchants who didn't care about the guild's seal of approval. It's like the ancient version of buying off-brand electronics from a guy in an alleyway. The quality might be hit or miss, but the price is too good to ignore. Comparing the guild to a legacy cable package in a world of streaming services is surprisingly accurate. You offer a bundle, quality control, social security, and religious community. But the new merchants only want the content, the product, and they want it on demand and cheap. They don't want to pay for your mystery plays or the candles in your chapel, they just want the gloves. Historians still argue whether the guilds were the architects of their own demise by being too rigid and resistant to technology, or if they were the victims of a sovereign state's greed as kings realized they could tax individual merchants more easily than they could squeeze a powerful, self-governing guild. It's a debate between internal decay and external execution, and from where you're sitting, the result is the same. Your monopoly is bleeding out. The kings are the real wild cards here. For a long time, the crown liked the guilds because they kept the cities orderly and productive. But now, the king needs money for bigger wars and flashier palaces. He started selling patents of monopoly to his friends, individuals who get the exclusive right to sell things like salt or coal, completely bypassing the traditional guild structures. It's like the government giving a gold star to one specific corporation and telling everyone else to go play in traffic. You realize that your privileges were always just a lease, and the landlord is looking for a tenant who pays more in rent. Remember that bridge toll. Imagine if the king suddenly decided that the bridge belonged to his cousin, and your guild-approved merchants now had to pay double. The sensory experience of the city is changing too. The rhythm of the guild bells is being drowned out by the noise of a more frantic, unorganized commerce. The streets are more crowded with strangers, merchants from across the sea who don't know your secret handshakes and don't care about your just price. The smell of the market is less about local craft and more about global trade. Spices from the east, silk from the Mediterranean, and a sense of hurried, impersonal transaction. You look at your masterpiece, that glove you worked so hard on, and you wonder if anyone even notices the fine stitching anymore. In a world of mass production, perfection is becoming an expensive luxury that the new middle class can't be bothered with. In a moment of dark humor, you think about the crocodile dung sunscreen we discussed. At least that was a weird choice that failed on its own merits. The guild system isn't failing because it's bad at what it does. It's failing because it's too good at being expensive. You're being outcompeted by good enough. You realize that the social safety net you relied on, the common box that would pay for your funeral, is getting emptier every year as fewer apprentices sign up for the long grind. Why spend 7 years learning a mystery when you can make a decent living as a rural day laborer for a putting out merchant? The incentive structure of the world has shifted, and you're still playing by the rules of 1350 in a world that's rapidly heading toward the Renaissance. The ASMR of your workshop, the steady scritch of the plane, now sounds like a countdown. You find yourself looking toward the horizon, wondering what's happening in the rest of the world. You've heard stories of a great empire to the east, the Ottomans, where the rules of power are being rewritten entirely. They don't have guilds quite like yours. They have a sultan who owns everything and everyone. It sounds terrifying, but also efficient. You've heard of a woman there, a slave who rose to become the most powerful queen in the world. Her story makes your struggle for master status look like a schoolyard game. As the sun sets, casting long, skeletal shadows across your workshop floor, you pack away your tools. You aren't giving up, not yet. You're a master, and you'll fight for your mystery until the last candle burns out. But you can't help but feel that the age of the brotherhood is ending. The world is becoming a place of individuals, of capital, and of kings who don't care about secret handshakes. You take a final look at the guild's banner hanging on the wall. It's beautiful, it's historic, and it's starting to look like a relic. You blow out the candle, the smell of burnt tallow, lingering in the air like a final, smoky goodbye to the world you thought you knew. Tomorrow, you'll have to figure out how to compete with the putting out system, or maybe you'll just start charging a consultation fee for the mystery of your presence. Either way, the just price is officially a dream from a more boring, more stable time. You leave the crumbling certainties of the medieval guild behind. The smell of damp leather and the sound of the London bells fading into a memory of a colder, smaller world. Suddenly, the air is no longer gray and thick with coal smoke. It is blindingly bright and smells of wild honey, scorched earth, and the sharp, metallic tang of cold river water. You are no longer a master of a trade. You are Alexandra, or perhaps Anastasia. Historians still argue whether your birth name was one or the other. A young girl from Ruthenia, in what the modern world will one day call Ukraine. Your life as you knew it has just been deleted by a raid of Crimean Tatars. You've been snatched from your home, bundled onto a horse, and transported across a vast, dusty landscape toward a future that looks less like a career path and more like a total system reboot. You are currently a captive in a caravan heading toward the legendary sublime port, the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the sensory experience is a brutal, high-definition assault. The dust of the steppe gets into your teeth, and the sun is so aggressive it feels like a personal insult. You are being onboarded into the most competitive environment on the planet, the imperial harem of Sultan Suleiman. This isn't a wellness retreat or a lifestyle choice. It's a high-stakes, survival of the fittest reality show where the prize is the heart of the most powerful man in the world. And the consolation prize is usually an early retirement in a silk sack at the bottom of the Bosphorus. You probably won't survive the social politics of this place without becoming a master of a different kind of mystery. The art of the shadow. You arrive in Istanbul, and the city hits you like a tidal wave of color and noise. It's a sensory overload that makes London look like a sleepy village. There's a scent of roasting coffee, the pungency of the spice markets, and the constant rhythmic call to prayer echoing off the domes of the Hagia Sophia. You are taken to the Topkapi Palace, a labyrinth of marble and silk that functions like a high-security corporate headquarters. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman harem was a strictly regulated institution, a school for queens where women were educated in languages, music, and politics. You aren't just a face in the crowd, you are an investment. In a quirky and fringe bit of palace gossip, it's said that you weren't actually chosen for your looks alone, though you certainly weren't hard to look at. You were chosen for your spirit. while the other girls were quiet and demure, following the terms of service of being a perfect captive. You were laughing. You were intelligent. You were vibrant. When you finally met the Sultan, you didn't just bow your head and hope for the best, you engaged him. This earned you the name Hurrem, which means the joyful one. It's a rebranding that would make a modern PR firm jealous. You went from Alexandra, the captive, to Hurrem the joy, essentially skipping the entry-level phase and moving straight into a prestige role. Comparing the harem to a modern corporate internship is surprisingly accurate, though the HR department has significantly more scimitars. You are living in a dormitory with dozens of other women, all of whom are technically your competitors. The one mother, one son rule is the law of the land. A woman can have one son with the Sultan, and once he's born, her job is to raise him to be a leader, usually far away from the capital. It's a system designed to prevent any one woman from getting too much influence. But you're about to hack the system. You're looking at the rules and deciding they're more like suggestions. The sarcasm of your situation isn't lost on you as you sit in the lush gardens, smelling the heavy, sweet scent of damask roses and jasmine. You're a slave, yes, but you're a slave who lives in a palace, eats the finest food, and has the ear of the man who decides the fate of empires. It's like being a prisoner in a 5-star hotel where the room service is incredible but you can never leave. You spend your days learning Ottoman Turkish, practicing your calligraphy and mastering the subtle DMs of the 16th century, writing poetry and letters to the Sultan that are so captivating they make his official state documents look like grocery lists. You're playing a long game, and your masterpiece isn't a glove or a brick, it's a political dynasty. Historians still argue whether your rise to power was a calculated, cold-blooded climb or a genuine love story that just happened to involve a lot of collateral damage. Was it a hostile takeover of the Sultan's heart, or was he a willing partner in your rebellion against tradition? Either way, you're breaking the standard operating procedures of the empire. You aren't just a favorite. You're becoming an indispensable advisor. You're talking to him about statecraft, about the European kings who are trying to tax their bread, remember our friends from earlier, and about the grand architecture of Istanbul. You're the chief operating officer of his heart. The sensory details of the harem are a constant rhythm of silk rustling on marble and the soft splash of fountains. It's an ASMR dreamscape that masks a world of lethal ambition. You watch the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who runs the place with an iron fist in a velvet glove. She's the ultimate board of directors, and she doesn't like how you're disrupting the company culture. You've already had your first performance review with her, and it involved a lot of silent, judging stares and some very pointed comments about your background. But you've got a secret weapon. The Sultan actually likes you. Like, really likes you. It's the kind of special project status that makes everyone else in the office want to throw their coffee at you. One night. As the call to prayer fades and the moon rises over the Golden Horn, you realize that your life in Ruthenia is truly gone. You've traded the wild honey for the rose water of the palace. You've traded the freedom of a peasant for the power of a queen. It's a trade that involves a lot of subscription fees in the form of stress and danger, but you're finally in a position to set your own just price. You think back to the 10th Legion and their boar stamps. They wanted to leave a mark on the earth. You want to leave a mark on history itself. Your Hurrem now, the joyful one, the one who laughs in the face of 1,000 years of tradition. As you prepare to meet the Sultan in the private chambers, the smell of ambergris and oud hangs heavy in the air. You adjust your silk kaftan, feeling the weight of the jewels around your neck. You aren't just Alexandra anymore. You're an icon. You're about to do something no woman in the Ottoman Empire has ever done. Before, you're about to turn a temporary contract into a permanent marriage. You're about to rewrite the terms and conditions of the Sultanate, and the world isn't going to know what hit it. You just have to make sure you keep laughing, because in this palace, your smile is the only thing standing between you and the silk sack. You stand in the center of the Sultan's private chamber, the air so thick with the scent of burning frankincense and expensive oud that it feels like you're breathing in liquidated gold. The silk hangings on the wall are the color of a bruised plum, flickering in the low light of 100 beeswax candles. You've successfully navigated the introductory phase of your life in the palace, but now you're about to perform a legal maneuver so audacious it's basically the 16th century version of a hostile takeover of a Fortune 500 company. You aren't satisfied with being a favorite, you want the full version of power, and that means rewriting the Ottoman terms of service from the inside out. For 300 years, the Ottoman sultans followed a very specific branding guide. They didn't marry. They had concubines, they had heirs, and they kept their private lives strictly separated from the machinery of the state. This wasn't just tradition, it was a strategy to ensure no foreign princess or local noble family could claim a piece of the throne through marriage. It was the ultimate closed-loop system. But you, the girl from Ruthenia with the bright eyes and the sharp wit, are about to find the ultimate loophole. This is a mainstream historical fact. In a move that absolutely scandalized the known world, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent legally married you, Hurrem Sultan, in a lavish ceremony around 1533 or 1534. You didn't just get a ring, you got a title change that shifted the entire tectonic plate of the empire, but before you could get to the wedding, you had to deal with your employment status. In a quirky and fringe bit of legal maneuvering, legend says you used the Sultan's own piety against him. You expressed a desire to build a mosque and a soup kitchen for the poor. A noble, charitable move. However, as a slave, the religious merit for your good deeds would technically go to your owner, the Sultan. You told him with a perfectly timed sigh how sad it made you that you couldn't earn your own points for the afterlife. Suleiman, being the magnificent guy he was, promptly gave you your manumission. You were officially unsubscribed from slavery. Then, when he called for you that night, you pulled the ultimate pro-gamer move. You informed him that as a free Muslim woman, it was now a sin for you to sleep with him outside of marriage. You effectively put the most powerful man on earth into a friend zone that only a wedding contract could unlock. Historians still argue whether this was a stroke of pure, cold-blooded genius or a testament to the genuine, overwhelming love Suleiman felt for you. Contemporaries in Europe were convinced you had used dark arts or potions to bewitch him. They couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that a man who could have anyone would choose to legally bind himself to one woman. To them, it wasn't romance, it was a system error. To you, standing there in your silk kaftan, it's just good business. You've gone from being property to being a partner. You are now the Haseki Sultan, the chief consort, a title created specifically to reflect your new premium status in the palace hierarchy. The sensory details of your new life are a study in excess. You no longer wear the simple linen of an apprentice or the rough wool of a peasant. Your clothes are woven with silver thread that catches the light like a spider web in the dew. You eat from jade plates that are supposed to change color if they touch poison, a very practical security feature in a palace where the middle management is constantly trying to downsize you. You spend your afternoons in the harem's courtyard, listening to the rhythmic, hypnotic splash of the marble fountains. It's a ultimate ASMR, but the peace is an illusion. You're constantly checking your notifications, the whispers from the eunuchs, the reports from the market, and the secret letters from the viziers. You've also broken the one mother, one son rule. In the old system, you'd have had one boy and then been decommissioned and sent to a provincial outpost to raise him. But you've had 5 sons and a daughter. You've basically monopolized the Sultan's reproductive output. It's like a multi-tier subscription model where you've locked in the family plan for the next century. By staying in Istanbul instead of leaving with your eldest son, you've fundamentally changed the workflow of the Ottoman government. You've moved the harem from the old palace to the top Kapai Palace, the actual head office of the empire. Now, the Sultan doesn't have to commute to see you. You're right there, next to the room of petitions, where you can hear the gears of the world turning. Comparing your role to a modern chief of staff isn't quite enough. You're more like the co-CEO. When Suleiman goes off to war to fight the Hungarians or the Persians, you are his eyes and ears in the capital. You write to him, not just about your longing for him, but about the market trend of Istanbul. You tell him who is being loyal and who is looking for a new job with his rivals. You're managing the brand of the House of Osman while he's out in the field doing the heavy lifting. You're even writing diplomatic letters to the King of Poland, your neighbor from your old life. Imagine the irony. The girl who was stolen in a raid is now texting the king to negotiate peace treaties. The sarcasm of your power is that you have to exercise it from behind a screen. You are the invisible hand of the empire. You attend the meetings of the Divan, the Imperial Council, but you do it from behind a grilled window, a firewall that allows you to see everything without being seen. You listen to the Grand Vizier discuss taxes on bread and tolls on bridges, and you realize that whether it's a Roman legion or a medieval guild, the user experience of the common person is always about paying up. Only now, you're the one helping to decide where the money goes. You're funding hospitals, schools, and public baths. You're building a legacy that isn't just about blood, but about stone and public relations. As you sit by the Sultan's side in the evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange over the Golden Horn, you look at the bore stamps on those old Roman tiles we talked about. They're buried deep under the foundations of this city. The Romans thought they were permanent. The guilds thought they were untouchable. You know better. Everything is a temporary license. You've rewritten the rules, but rules are only as strong as the person who enforces them. You look at your sons, your startup projects, and you know that the succession plan is going to be the most brutal performance review of all. The sound of the night in Topkapi is a soft, persistent hum of activity, the changing of the guard, the rustle of the wind through the cypress trees, the distant barking of a dog in the city. You feel a strange sense of calm. You've survived the raid, the caravan, the market, and the long grind of the harem. You've become the queen of joy, the woman who laughed her way to the top of the world. You've traded your free life for a royal one, and while the fees are astronomical, you've decided that being the one who collects them is a whole lot better than being the one who pays. You just have to make sure you keep the Sultan's subscription active, because in this world, there's no such thing as a lifetime membership. The orange glow of the sun dipping behind the Suleymaniye Mosque casts a long, sharp shadow across the marble terrace, looking like a dark needle pointed straight at the heart of the city. You are Hurrem Sultan, and you are no longer the joyful girl who laughed in the face of captivity. You are the architect of an era. The air here in the twilight of your life smells of heavy jasmine, expensive ink, and the slightly metallic scent of old coins. Your body feels heavy, the silk of your robes a burdensome weight on bones that have carried the secrets of an empire for decades. You've successfully disrupted the Ottoman system, but as any master of a guild or commander of a legion could tell you, the hardest part of building a monopoly isn't the startup phase, it's the succession planning. You look out over the Bosphorus, the water churning like a silver snake. This is a mainstream historical fact. Hurrem Sultan was the first woman in Ottoman history to truly wield political power on par with the Sultan, a period historians call the Sultanate of Women. You've turned the harem into a shadow cabinet, and your daughter, Mirima, is already being groomed to take over the family business. But the cost of this premium tier, life is starting to come due. In the Ottoman world, the exit strategy for a prince who doesn't become sultan isn't a comfortable retirement. It's a silken bowstring. This is the fratricide law, a brutal system update designed to prevent civil wars by killing off all the siblings of the new sultan. Your sons are in a winner-take-all contest, and the stakes are literally everything. To ensure your own son, Selim, becomes the next CEO of the empire, you've had to engage in some very aggressive HR maneuvers. This brings us to the dark heart of your legacy. Historians still argue whether you were the mastermind behind the downfall of Prince Mustafa, the Sultan's eldest and most popular son from his previous consort, Mahidevran. Mustafa was the legacy product, well-loved, talented, and the natural choice for the throne. But he wasn't your son. In 1553, Mustafa was executed by his own father on charges of rebellion, charges that many believe were supported by leaked documents and manufactured evidence provided by you and your son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha. It was a hostile takeover that left the empire in shock. It's the ultimate dark humor of history. To save your children, you had to destroy someone else's. The sensory details of these final years are quieter, more focused on the legacy you'll leave in stone. You funded the Haseki Hurrem Sultan complex, a massive project with a mosque, a hospital, and a soup kitchen. You've spent a fortune on public relations with the poor of Istanbul. It's a quirky and fringe bit of historical irony that the woman accused of being a witch and a murderer in the palace was viewed as a saint by the hungry people of the city. You realize that history is just a matter of which account you're looking at. To the nobles, you're a bug in the system. To the commoners, you're a feature that provides free bread. And unlike the medieval lords who taxed the oven, remember our Fournier? You are the one giving the bread away for free, at least on the surface. Comparing your life to a long-running series that's reaching its final episode feels right. You've seen the Roman ruins of Jerusalem, the muddy tolls of the English rivers, and the closed source secrets of the guilds. You've realized that power is just a series of access codes that change every few centuries. The Romans used standardization, the guilds used monopoly, and you used influence. But now, the loading screen of your life is slowing down. You spend your days writing letters, not of passion, but of legacy. You're making sure the schools stay funded and the hospitals stay clean. You're trying to patch the world one final time before your session expires. The sarcasm in your voice has softened into a weary wisdom. You think back to the merchant tax and the layer white fines. Those women were assets to be traded. You were merchandise to once. But you refused to be a passive asset. You became the administrator. You look at your hands. They aren't calloused like the apprentices or scarred like the legionaries, but they are stained with the ink of 1,000 executive orders. You have navigated the long grind and come out the other side as the only master who matters. As the night air turns cold, you feel a strange sense of peace. You've protected your sons, you've secured your husband's heart, and you've built a brand that will last for centuries. You're Alexandra, you're Hurim, you're the joyful one, and you're the most dangerous woman in the world. You've paid every tax life threw at you, and you've collected interest on every single one. The Sultanate of Women has begun, and though you won't be there to see the final season, you know you've set the plot in motion. The ASMR of the palace at night, the distant rhythmic clack of the night watchman's staff on the stones, the soft sigh of the wind through the silk curtains, is finally pulling you toward a sleep that doesn't require a subscription renewal. You close your eyes, the scent of roses fading into the dark. You've walked through the mud, the dust, and the gold, and you've found that the only thing that's truly free is the memory you leave behind. You're ready to log off. The world outside your window is quiet now, the frantic energy of the day settling into a soft, velvet stillness. The heavy taxes of your own life, the deadlines, the worries, the endless notifications are fading away, like the sound of a distant bridge toll or the rhythmic thump of a Roman oar. You are safe, you are warm, and the long grind is over for tonight. Imagine the stars over the Bosphorus, cool and distant, watching over the ruins of empires and the mysteries of forgotten trades. They don't charge for their light. They don't ask for a license to see. Let the images of silk and stone, of iron boars and golden bread drift into the background. Your breathing is slow and steady, a calm rhythm that matches the quiet pulse of the night. You aren't a peasant, a legionary, or a queen. You are simply you, tucked away in a world that is, for this moment, entirely your own. The history of the world is a long, winding story, but your chapter for today is finished. There are no more fees to pay, no more masterpieces to prove. Sleep is the only thing that remains truly, beautifully free. It is the open source sanctuary where your mind can wander without a toll collector or a guild master to stop you. The lights are dim, the fan is humming a soft, steady lullaby, and the bore of the day has been put to rest. You've traveled through time and survived it all. Now it's time to just be. Close your eyes, let the darkness be a soft, warm blanket, and drift away into the quiet mystery of your own dreams.